Welcome everybody. Today is all about Ethiopia. My name is Jesse Pielke. I'm the host of HashrateUp, and today I am welcoming my friend Nemo Semret on the show to talk about Ethiopia's macro situation, the energy situation on the ground, the share of renewables that are being used and that are stranded, and also the chances that Ethiopia has when it adopts Bitcoin mining, what the situation looks like on the ground, and a lot more. So I hope you have fun with the episode, and without further ado, let's get started. Hello, everybody. This is HashrateUp. One more episode. Thank you for tuning in one more time. I am here together with Nemo Semret today, a good friend of mine, and we are going to talk about mining in Ethiopia. As you have heard before, I'm very focused on mining in Africa with my company. I want to bring more hash rate to the continent and promote the idea, take down the perceived risks and all of that. And today I am very happy that we can get to speak about mining in Ethiopia, which has great potential. I myself have visited Nemo recently to see what he was working on. And I think there's a bunch to discuss here. Hello, Nemo. Welcome to the show.
Hello, yes, sir. Hi, happy to be here. Been hearing so much about hash rate up.
Yeah, from me mainly, yeah.
No, it's a global brand,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. From me, you've heard that mostly. All right, so we are at block height 826,390. Our 30-day hash rate is at 516.7, and the hash price is at 78.46. We've had a cold snap in southern Texas recently, and I think around 25% of the hash rate went down briefly as miners switched off to sort that out. And now we are expecting a difficulty adjustment of -4%, which is going to bump the hash price up again. And this is how we play that game. I mean, I've seen horrible pictures from miners being frozen out in their containers in the US. Not great to see, but hey, I mean, you've got to operate quality, otherwise you don't last, right?
That's right.
In
Well,
Ethiopia,
we're lucky we don't have those problems in
I was
Ethiopia.
just gonna
Yeah.
say there's a nice 25-degree climate, a bit of wind, very high. It's perfect, really. But we're gonna get into that now. Nemo, tell
Mhm.
people a bit about yourself, how you got into Bitcoin mining, and just take a brief moment to give people your background, please.
Okay, great. So I have, I've been into Bitcoin for quite a long time, but really not from the mining perspective. And just to go back to my Bitcoin origin story, I have just because of my academic and professional background, I've always had I have a very deep professional interest in game theory, cryptography, especially the game theory and queuing and information theory. So from the networking world. Um, and with the so when I came across Bitcoin, I got really interested in it mainly from a game theory perspective. I would say initially, and and I was like, oh wow, this is cool, and eventually learning about the fact that it solves the Byzantine general problem and so on. So it was just more like a computer sciencey game theory perspective that got me really interested. And at the time, and I heard about this through some ex-colleagues. I used to work at Google a long time ago, and there's like a lot of discussion groups that of ex-Googlers that I'm a part of, and just random stuff comes up. And so this Bitcoin came up very, very early in one of those groups. In fact, it was Bitcoins plural. That's how long ago it was. This guy was like, "Have you heard of Bitcoins?" And yeah, so I thought it was very interesting, and but it was the it took me maybe like 2 3 years after that to actually really start thinking. It was always in the back of my mind, but I was really busy with work and stuff, and eventually started buying and investing in Bitcoin. But before I did, actually, the first thing I did was I read the white paper, I downloaded the client, I ran Bitcoin Core for a while, and then yeah, and so I was really interested in that aspect of Bitcoin as a user, as its economic potential, and and as as understanding economic history and so on. But and then so that's the background of Bitcoin. And but about 2 3 years ago, actually a little more than 3 years ago, in 3.5 years ago, in 2020, I remember very clearly, in August 2020, the peak of COVID lockdowns. I was in New York, and I was reading about, and I'm from Ethiopia, and I'm always very interested in everything that's been going on in Ethiopia. And for the first time, even though I'm an electrical engineer by background, has been mostly in computer science and telecom and networking and stuff like that. But for the first time, I started really diving deep into the energy situation in Ethiopia and electricity. And a light bulb went off with energy in Ethiopia and Bitcoin through mining. So that's kind of where the epiphany happened. It was August 2020. I was like, wait a minute, Ethiopia is like the world's best place for Bitcoin mining. I can't believe I hadn't put those two pieces together in
Yeah.
my mind for many, many years. And so I decided to, I was still at my previous startup then, but I started talking about it, thinking about it with my close friend and partner, Tasama, we were and one other friend who Menna, who's in California. Um, we just started thinking, okay, this could be like a really good thing. And by 2021, we finally reached the point where we were confident enough to say, let's just start. Let's just do it. So we formed this company, started coming back to Ethiopia, and got a lot of traction pretty quickly, and were able to meet the power company and explain this vision. And obviously, you and the hash rate up audience totally understands the concept of mining and energy, but this was very new here in Ethiopia. So we introduced this concept of what is mining, what does it, and how it relates to energy. And of course, from the energy company's perspective, they completely understand the stranded energy aspect. That's they live it, they understand it way better than any of us, because this is the reality they live in, with generation, transmission, balancing the grid. But then when we introduced this idea that, hey, Bitcoin is this magical customer that can soak up excess demand, but at the same time that's super flexible geographically. As excess supply that's geographically flexible. They were like, "Wow, that sounds really good," and so we were able to move pretty fast. And by December 2021, within about first 6 months, we had concluded a power purchase agreement with the power company here, and so we're officially the first company in Ethiopia to start this idea of Bitcoin mining.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Amazing.
that's the background.
Yeah, I mean, people need to
Yeah.
understand. I think about Ethiopia is there's. I mean, you can go into it into more detail better than I can. There's enormous potential. Maybe give people a bit of background first. Why Ethiopia? Why is there so much potential for stranded power and Bitcoin mining in your view?
Yeah, so Ethiopia is a big country, and it's one thing that nature has blessed Ethiopia with is um, water and gravity. We have a lot of both of those things. Because it's a very geographically, it's a very high altitude center of the country, and then it sort of drops dramatically down in altitude. On the edges of the country, and there's an enormous amount of rainfall in the highlands. So what that means is, and I'm talking about, like even here in Addis Ababa, which is 2,500 meters above sea level. Like just for Americans, that's like I guess almost. one and a half, almost twice or one and a half times higher than Denver, Colorado. So we're pretty high up, and the so that gives us the two things: rainfall plus gravity means a lot of potential energy,
Yeah.
and that has historically not been developed. Very very little development, but whatever electricity there is hydro, and in the recent years there's been a major push to sort of finally start tapping into this mega potential, and it's going slowly, but there's there's a major, very famous milestone, which is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD as it's known, is a very very high profile project which essentially doubles the generation capacity of the country. It's not fully online yet, by the way, but it's a first huge step, and but it's really even and it's massive by Ethiopian standards. It's like the largest dam in
Yeah.
Africa, and it's generating a lot of power, and it's doubling the capacity of the country. But it's still the beginning. You know, there you could easily go another 500% on top of that in terms of just if you just look at nature and physics and what's exists in
Do
this
you know how
country.
much of it
And
is utilized right now? I think it's 6 gigawatts of capacity. How much of that is being produced?
yeah, six. So I believe there it's 2 out of 11, or I think the plan to the turbines. So are been
Yeah.
deployed. So it's taking so right now. So yeah,
So it's
again,
like
it's like
around
maybe
15%. Doing math live is always
15%
difficult.
of it. Yeah, exactly. About 15% of its capacity. The dam itself, just to give you some history, it started in, I think, 2011. In terms of just the physical construction, it's a massive thing. And so now, in the last year, the physical, the structure is done, and the reservoir is largely filled. There's a little more, and it's going through a very phased approach. So the filling started in 4 years ago, and now it's going to be, and they only fill it up, so build up the reservoir during the rainy season when there is excess
Mhm.
water, so that it doesn't affect the avail. So when there's too much water, which is because the Nile, this is part of the Nile basin, and it's 85% of the water of the Nile comes through the Blue Nile, which is where this dam is in Ethiopia. So yeah, so it's the filling process is kind of very very carefully managed long term thing, because you want to fill up when there's too much water, which is
Yeah.
in the June, July, August timeframe, and
Yeah,
then because otherwise,
people might
and
have
then not.
seen this news articles around the girl, which I always have to chuckle a bit at because it's a German surname, a German first name. Gerd Müller was a famous soccer player, or football player, I should
Of
say, as a
course, Gert
European.
Müller.
And so I have to always give
Yes,
it a bit
yes.
of a chuckle when I say Gerd, the Gerd Dam.
Gerd Müller.
Yeah, the
Actually, I
Egyptians.
remember Gerd Müller and
You go first.
yeah, no, I say, I mean, it's a little bit before my time, but when I was a kid, Gerd Müller was a legend. Beckenbauer, Gerd Müller, Sepp
The
Maier, the
greats.
goalkeeper. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, yeah.
Anyway,
Although I'm against Germany in soccer, just for the record, I don't want to
come
lie to
on,
you.
man. Okay.
They're the enemy. Okay, I like.
But I know the Egyptians were not as happy about the project, right? Give us the just brief
Yeah,
background
yeah.
around
That's
that.
that's Yeah, that's a big topic, and mainly if you're outside in the outside world, you will have heard of GERD primarily because of the Egypt geopolitics, and I think I could go on for like hours about this topic, but uh, uh, there is a legitimate concern and a fake concern, and both of them are extremely important. So I'll start with the latter, or the fake concern is that this dam, which is a very big dam, as I said, is gonna can somehow harm Egypt and Sudan, which are the two downstream countries that get all of their water, almost essentially all their water from the Nile, and So, but this is, I think, a fake concern, but it's there's political reasons for it. The reason it's fake is that this dam is only used for electricity and not for
Irrigation.
diverting
Yeah.
water for irrigation. So, and for electricity, it's non-consumptive. All the water that comes in goes through the turbines. You get the kinetic energy becomes electricity, and then the water flows out on the other side of the dam, and it just continues flowing downstream. So, there's really no loss of water because you put a dam, if it's hydro, right? So there is no loss of the net amount of water that arrives in Sudan or in Egypt. Number one. Number two, it's actually because but the dam has a reservoir, so it's like a little bit like a battery for water. All right, so it actually helps because if you just Google floods in Sudan and Egypt every year, especially in Sudan, there's like suddenly during the peak rainy season, the Nile floods, and it's sometimes so part of it is natural, and this is it's totally people are adapted, but there's excessive floods. One year you'll have 100,000 homes destroyed and blah blah. So by having a upstream dam that's large, and then you can kind of regulate the excess and sort of redistribute it. So you'll have avoid the times when you have too much water, and also avoid the opposite, like when there's too little, the dam can release more. So it effectively helps Sudan and Egypt both in terms of flooding and droughts because it stabilizes it. And the beauty of it is not because this is not the because Ethiopia is, just because the Ethiopians are nice guys, although we are, but it's also just in naturally aligned incentives. If you're generating electricity, you want a steady flow. So the goal of the hydroelectric generation is to have stable flow and to reduce it when it's too high and increase it when it's too low, which is compatible with the goal of the people living downstream. So I think it's non-consumptive, so there shouldn't really be any concern about this dam. Now, but the Egyptians and I think the Sudanese have generally been pretty cool with it, but the Egyptian government has been very very vocal against it, and I think now the reason is I think for them historically, all the upstream countries of the Nile Basin, Blue Nile and White Nile, and that includes Uganda and South Sudan and all these other countries that contribute, and Eritrea also contributes to. Historically, all these other countries have not done anything with the water, right? And Egypt has had essentially, thousands of years of civilization built on the Nile water. So they're like, well, their fear is that if they say okay, even though it's non-consumptive, it opens the door for consumptive uses in the future.
Yeah.
And then they'll get then those other, if we build more and more dams in all these different countries. I think there's 11 countries total in the
So what they worried about is precedent, and you have to
setting a precedent and losing control over being able to having 100%. So yes, I mean, I think that part is legitimate. Everybody should be concerned because long-term water allocation is a delicate thing, and there's a very long history in many different parts of the world about how you share water for consumptive purposes, and so there needs to be a cooperative approach to make sure that upstream countries don't mess up downstream countries.
I think in Egypt, 90% of people live from the Nile or near the Nile, right? So there is immediate fear, and I think it's not just so much logic, but it's also the people in Egypt that are like, "What the hell is going on? Is that going to impact our lives somehow?" And so politics has to react. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, let's not make the show only about the GERD. I know. Look, let's just to summarize it. from the view that I have about the country, and you can add to that whatever is
Hmm.
missing. 90% of power is created from hydro in Ethiopia, right? That's the
Yeah.
fact. 90% is hydropower, which is huge. 98% is
I
renewable,
think like 92 or something. Yeah, 92 hydro,
somewhere there,
98
huge
renewable. I think.
amount,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because it's
yeah.
not just that dam. There's plenty other dams in Ethiopia
Hmm.
that make use of all the rainfall and the gravity and the elevation in the
Yeah.
country. So it's really
Hmm.
unique, and I didn't know this before. But obviously, for Bitcoin mining, if
Hmm.
you look at South America, that is perfect, right? So what's lacking, and this is why they overbuilt these things, is so they will overbuild them for the future, and then what's lacking is transmission, right? And this is a common theme in
Yeah.
Africa: is there is no transmission lines, but there's a lot of potential and actual generation capacity that could be used but isn't, because the energy has
Hmm.
nowhere to go, right? And so that is exactly
Yes.
where Bitcoin mining is perfect, which is why I am so keen on bringing more hash rate here, to the continent that we are both on right now, is because of that exact
Yeah.
fact, right? If you look at a high transmission voltage line network map of Africa, you'll see there's many black spots where you'll never ever get running electricity from a grid from. So it's
Yeah.
all off grid. And to do that, you need Bitcoin mining. At least in
Yeah.
my view, I can't think of any other solution. Um, is there anything that you want to
Yeah.
add to the Ethiopia energy situation from what I've said, Nemo?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think I would add, just clarify that not just it's transmission and distribution, right? Because you have these very expensive long distance backbone, like these big lines that you see at very high voltage.
Hmm.
But that's a massive development, or just geographically. It's very, very expensive. But even more probably is the last mile, like getting the power lines into every neighborhood, into every village, and into every town. It's just enormous amounts of infrastructure. So I would say transmission and distribution,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think in Ethiopia, and I think this is really within the Ethiopian, social and economic political environment, it's really important for people to understand that Bitcoin can be helpful because we need, you know, a huge amount of investment to just get the distribution and transmission to the people from what's already being generated. And that money is not coming anytime soon unless we find a way to monetize the generating capacity that we have.
I mean,
The
it solves another
number,
problem, Nemo, right? It solves this problem of Ethiopia currency is extremely destroyed by the fiat money system. Where do the dollars come
that's a
from?
whole other topic.
Right?
Yes, yeah,
So
yeah,
we
yeah,
could probably
exactly.
make a whole
Yeah,
episode about the economic situation in Ethiopia as well. But I'm just saying, Bitcoin mining, and we're going to get into that now, can be another a solution to that problem as well, where you have international
yeah,
clients, right, that will pay taxes and for your service in dollars, which are hard to get to for the country.
yeah.
Um,
Exactly. It's essentially from a country economy point of view. It's just an export business, right? You're taking something that we have in the country, which is and producing something out of it, which has an international market. So it's an export business, and that means. From a macro perspective, it means improves the balance of
mhm.
payments, like more dollars coming in, because yeah, like you've been here, everybody who, if you spend 5 minutes in Ethiopia, you immediately realize that the deficit, that there's more dollars going out than dollars coming in, and that dominates
Yeah.
everything. Like that's just like the all overwhelming fact that really affects everybody and every business and every sector. So
Anybody that wants to see what fiat money can do to a country, at least like that's how I perceive it, should go to Addis Abeba. Because I mean,
yeah, yeah,
just to go into that very briefly, because it's just very interesting, right? There's two things now that still stick very much out to me after I came to visit you in December. The first one is that you literally have old timers running around that blast out fumes that I've never seen before, right? Because there's a ban,
yes,
as you told me, there's a ban on importing used cars. So the cars that you see on the
yeah,
road are maintained for ages. Like engineers perform magic tricks on these cars to keep them running. But obviously,
Yeah.
the pollution situation is not solved by having old engines run through the city. And then the second thing that really stuck out to me is, and you'll know what's coming now, are these concrete skeletons everywhere that you see, that
Yeah.
seemingly, to me, you have a different view, seemingly nobody seems to be working on most of these, is because people have to start building them with what's available to secure their land, because in Ethiopia there is, less property rights than in the US, for example, right? So people start building them to keep the rights to the land, and then what you see is
Yeah.
these structures everywhere, and then people get stuck, as
Hmm.
you told me, right? They get
Yeah.
stuck on importing
Foreign currency.
toilets and and
Yeah,
cables and
exactly.
doors and windows and window frames and everything that you need to complete a building, because there is no allocation
Yeah.
to foreign currency. It's it's
Yeah.
extremely bizarre to see, I think.
Yeah, no, I think if you wanted to do like a case study on the on the fiat problems, fiat money problems, you should absolutely study Ethiopia because it's
Yeah,
incredible. Like all how what amount of problems and yeah, but and at the same time, it's the first part of your story there with about the cars. Yeah, that's kind of Ethiopia in a nutshell. The flip side of that is that we have amazing mechanics, like literally.
yeah, that's the free
Ethiopian
market coming
mechanics
through,
can
right?
take
Always finding its way somewhere.
exactly.
Yeah. It's nuts.
Exactly. So you have to be a genius to survive. So to keep a car going for like 50 years, 60
Yeah.
years. So you have really, really good mechanics. In fact, just yesterday I had to change. Muffler fell off my 20-something-year-old Volkswagen, so I had to go get it fixed. And the guys did an amazing job in 1 hour. And it's just like the skill level and the effort and the creativity and so on is really
Yeah.
good. But yeah, but unfortunately, it's you only see it in these dire circumstances. But yeah, like the car thing is a perfect example of like we have so many irrational government
Regulations
policies.
and intervention.
Oh yeah, completely irrational. So one thing is that yeah, somebody said it might make sense at the beginning, and this is trickles through the whole monetary and everything systems. Like if we have too many used car, if we allow used cars, then we'll have a lot of old cars, and the market will be will be distorted or whatever, or like people will be driving crappy cars and it will be unsafe. Okay, that sounds good, but then the implementation of the rule is no used cars, including like very excellent quality 4-year-old car. You can't import it, and it's just like, well, we have a country where GDP per capita is $1,000, right? Like we have per person, and there's 1 million cars in the country for 100 million people. Like it's like 1%. It's literally the 1% of the population that has cars.
Crazy.
So in that environment, to say you only can have brand new cars is ridiculous. Like obviously, if you could buy a 5-year-old car from Japan or from Europe or whatever, and that's in great condition, then that solves a major problem. But the consequence of having these absurdly, you know, uh, domineering solution to say no more used cars is that now the market for cars is highly distorted. So you can have really expensive brand new cars, or you have every old car, no matter how beat up it is going to keep going forever. And the air quality, ironically, then becomes way worse.
Yeah,
So
of
the
course.
problem initially was to say if we allow secondhand cars that would have bad quality, what we have is way worse quality and enormous inconvenience and economic unfairness. And then this policy is just busted, but it's just sitting there, and then it creates all this bureaucratic nightmare of like, well, you can import a car if it's 2024, but not if it's 2023, or if it's like this many
Mm.
kilometers on the odometer or not. It's just like, and then yeah. So it's a good. I think the car situation is a good nut in a nutshell.
This is what happens
And
when
the
you,
other interesting
yeah.
thing, by the way, related to energy, is that the other thing that's again, we're coming back to Bitcoin, I promise, but like fuel is subsidized here, and it's just if you just step back and think about it, it's the craziest thing in the world, right? Because it's a country where, like I said, 1% of the population has cars. So why would you
Yeah,
subsidize
but
fuel?
what
It's like the
what percent
government
of the
is giving
population has
money to.
cars? You know what I mean?
Hmm?
What population? What part of the population has cars? Those that are have
Yeah, 1%.
benefited
Obviously,
major.
1% that has the most money, and then so now we have a policy where the government subsidizes something for 1% of the population, which is the richest 1%, at the expense of the 99% who don't have cars. It's like, why would you subsidize
Yeah,
fuel? It's crazy. But there's political reasons. This is a very, and this is throughout Africa. You'll find this, and but it's political reasons because people, fuel prices are always like a hypersensitive topic. As soon as you change fuel prices, like you have riots and people protest and governments. So it's like a political landmine. So and most people don't think through what a subsidy is. So if governments will easily get attacked if you end a subsidy, even though because people think, oh, subsidy is good, like it should be free, things should be free. I like free stuff, but they don't think who's paying for it.
it's always somebody.
So very few people. Yeah, and even if you just ask people all over, even people who would be on the net beneficiary side, they'll be like, oh, no, the government should not let fuel prices go up because if life is already expensive enough, and we don't want fuel prices to go up because that will make everything more
Yeah,
expensive. And I'm like, yeah, but who's paying for
yeah.
it?
No, okay.
It's like,
It's bizarre.
where is the money coming from? And the free money is like one of these weird things that just really breaks everybody's
Yeah.
brains. And
I mean,
yeah,
here, just
fiat
fun fact: in South
society.
Africa, the
Yeah.
price for fuel is always the same. So if you ride around here in Cape Town, if you happen to be in town for the Adopting Bitcoin conference, the price at every single fuel station will always be the same because it's set by the government. Anyway, let's end the macro Ethiopia show here. Let's go let's go into Bitcoin mining more. Now,
Yeah, yeah.
who are the players today? Because I know it's not just you. What's the situation with mining in Ethiopia at the moment?
Yeah, so I think we started 2 years ago. As I said, we didn't, in terms of actually starting the company and getting the PPA, and then we ran into a lot of bureaucratic problems, and we can get into many of those details. But as we've been sort of slowly working our way through the bureaucracy and getting, and there's one particular part of the bureaucracy that's just been giving us hell for like a year and a half. During because we insist on doing things sort of legally and not taking any unethical shortcuts. Um, in the meantime, now the word has gotten out, and partly we're responsible for telling people about the energy situation in Ethiopia. And so, so in the last 6 months to 12 months, a bunch of people have come in, mainly from China and a couple of others, and I think from Russia as well, and who've come in and said, "Hey, we want to be miners too." So and they've approached the power company, and a few of them have gotten PPAs basically, and again we kind of pioneered the template of like how what the power purchase along with co-location and building modular data centers and so on. So with as part of the power energy purchase, the so yeah, now there's a bunch of companies that have come in that are doing that, all foreigners. So as far as we know, we are still and I think it's a small community, so we pretty much hear about everything that's happening pretty quickly. But yeah, we're the only local company still, Ethiopian company, but there's a number of foreign companies that have come in, signed PPAs, and have started building out their sites. Um, and yeah, and we're ironically, one of the side effects of this bureaucracy that we've been combating is, and this goes back to what we were talking about before, this distortion of fiat money and foreign currency and so on. They ended up creating these bizarre rules that favors foreigners versus local companies, which is actually unconstitutional if you ask legal experts here. But people make rules, and you can't really fight, challenge them in court, or make sure they're logical. All you can do is kind of try to argue and work the system to say, like, no, this is the right way, this is what it should be. So we were caught for a while in a situation where being a domestic company, which we thought was an advantage, was actually a disadvantage. And now we finally worked through that. And then the second thing is that foreign companies, I don't want to make any accusations specifically, but it's well known that foreign companies come in and they perceive Africa as, oh, it's just Africa. Africa means you just bribe people and then you get stuff done. And really, this is just really heartbreaking and not good for us, because we think that Bitcoin is something that is a good thing, and we want it to be good for the
Yeah.
country, not just for the mining industry, but we want it to have a good impact on the country, including the political, and not at least not contribute to
Yeah.
corruption. But unfortunately, there is in our industry in Bitcoin mining a subculture of saying, like, screw it, just go in, get, do whatever it takes, pay bribes, whatever, and then if the stuff blows up 6 months later, you pack up and go to the next country, and then you do the same thing. And that's not good for the political environment. It's not good for ethically, from a corruption standpoint, and it's also not good from an energy grid stability and long-term sustainability point of
Yeah,
view.
it's that
So
typical short-term versus long-term view, right? And we have seen
yeah,
before
yeah,
Bitcoin with no mercy punishes short-term thinking. And
yeah,
so what I am a bit in fear of is that, it'll just be a dumping ground for old M20s and M30s because power is super cheap. And then people don't give a damn and break all the rules and
yeah,
get stuff done quickly, produce a couple hashes while not having a long-term view in place. Whereas you, with the Ethiopian background that you have, I mean, you moved your whole family from America to Ethiopia, to Addis, which is a huge commitment. You have a view of, hey, we can move to substations or to hydro dams directly and really improve the energy situation for this country, and for the first
yeah,
time probably showcase what Bitcoin mining can do for an African nation that has an abundant surplus of energy that they can use
yeah,
without anybody else's permission, right?
yeah,
And it has the chance to be an absolute door opener breakthrough project, because I am fairly convinced that other countries that have similar situations with abundant sources of energy will see what's going on and be like, hey, like, we can also do that. We can generate revenue in a currency that we can exchange for literally everything else, or even if it's just in the first step, international companies settling their bills in dollars without asking for anybody's permission. And that's absolutely
yeah,
huge, and that's the potential, and it's all at risk if you have reckless behavior coming in that has short-term goals in mind, which is exactly what we
yeah.
don't want. I mean, has this had negative effects on any other countries? I remember something in Angola going wrong, but you might have a better idea.
Yeah, I think I think the I don't know the total inside details, but if and most people actually, Angola was never really talked about much
I know it's
as
illegal to
a
mine there now.
mining. Yeah, and even before, sort of stealthily, there was just very corrupt approach there, where people came in and were getting electricity and just bribing and not and created a very big, quickly growing, out of control growing mining sector there, Bitcoin mining sector there, that was entirely relying on corruption, as from what I understood. And then when the individuals in government changed, and then there was a complete backlash, and all the miners were, or a lot of them were thrown out, and so yeah, it's sort of the extreme version, I think, of. And I heard also, in again, I don't have direct personal experience of it, but like I think in Georgia, the country, not the U.S. State, in Georgia, and I think there was also an overrush to unsustainable, short-term mining, and then a backlash, and the government was like, no, this whole thing is bad, just kick it out,
Yeah.
or and I think Kazakhstan also is a mixed bag, where a lot of people went to Kazakhstan, and then there was like corruption, criminal elements, and backlash, and so on. So I think the good thing. I think there's the in Ethiopia, uh, comparatively speaking, it's a very. I think the situation is a little bit better because, first of all, I think the power company, and I think we should give credit to them. They do understand and they do care about their mission, and we've gotten to know the power company very well from all the top to bottom, and so if they have the to the extent that they can, they do understand and they do want to sell capacity where it makes sense, and not and because again, as we know, there's stranded energy in one place and then shortage in another place. Like if you ask the average Ethiopian, they'll be like, what do you mean? Power went out yesterday in my house for 2 hours. So the distribution end, so you have shortage and abundance, excess and shortage at the same time. So it's very important to understand that and to do it in a balanced way. That's a win-win. And that's how we approach the power company. And I think that's why we still have a very, very good relationship with them, because we're like, our growth plan is to work with you to understand geographically where the excess demand would be helpful, and not just to come in and demand, like, give us more power give us more and more power. So I think the good thing in Ethiopia is I think the power company tries to do the right thing. The bad thing is that there's other parts of the government where people can come in and have influence, uh, and I think distort this, and can override or impose themselves a little bit on the power company, and 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 even just people who may not totally understand it. So yes, I think there is a little bit of fear that, let's say, somebody comes in and just says, through political pressure, and says, just give me, or through corruption, just comes and takes a ridiculous amount of power in the wrong place, and then that ends up being something that takes away from the supply that's available for the consumer, and for industries that are developing, and ends up being a negative contributor, and then also it overloads the grid, and takes away from other
And
demand.
it's not
So
just theory,
it
right?
could end
There's
up being,
already been
yeah.
sort of wary or borderline negative press about Bitcoin mining before anything has really started. you know, about
Yeah,
companies announcing
yeah,
things and making moves, which are then like, what are you guys doing? We talked about what anyway.
yeah.
So I mean, Nemo, maybe to give people a more clearer idea, right? What are the opportunities and the risks specifically? Like if somebody, and again, I this was one of the first things that I've done with my company. I tell people that quite frequently, was to approach you and say, hey, Nemo, where do you need help? And it's like, well, I
Hmm.
just, I need to sell this somehow. So that's what I've been doing, and I've been giving people the basic idea and the conditions and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But obviously, everything comes with risk, right? And in my
Hmm.
opinion, there is a lot of perceived risks which keeps people away from doing this. And there is a real level of risk that people judge differently. So, what would you say specifically are the opportunities right now, and what are the risks that really matter to you as well?
Yeah, I think risks. I'll start with the risk side. I think when we started in 2000, to formally started, as I mentioned, our idea started in 2020, and then formally the company started in 2021. it was kind of a really, if you just looked at if you talk to anybody about Ethiopia, including in Ethiopia, we were at that time at the peak of a 2-year civil war, which went from like November 2020 to November 2022. Like for those 2 years, there was a massive civil war going on in Ethiopia, in the northern part of the country. So anybody from outside, you just look at, that's the dominant news, obviously, about Ethiopia. And so it's like, what? How can you do any kind of investment and when there's this crazy, huge war going on? And which is obviously a natural reaction. Now we said, this started while we were planning our business, and it was completely shock to us as much as anybody. Even though there's political tensions, the fact that it broke out into war was just a huge shock. On November 4th, 2020, the day of the presidential elections in the U.S., and not coincidentally, by the way. But anyway, so it was. So I say, number one, the political risk is very high. But we made the judgment that, hey, okay, first of all, technically, the areas where we would be physically working were not at war. And it's a big country, so yes, stuff is happening 1,000 kilometers away, sometimes closer, whatever. But it doesn't prevent us from being. And we said, okay, we want to do this because this is, it's once in a lifetime opportunity to do something good for the long term of the country, and the war will end at some point, whatever, and we still want to contribute for the future. So that's why we did it, because my co-founder and I are Ethiopians, and we've always had this dream of doing good things for our country, and with Bitcoin, it was just a great opportunity. But it would be totally understandable if you don't have that emotional connection to say, like, wow, this is crazy. I'm not going to go into a war zone. There's plenty of other countries in the world where there's no war, so I'd rather put my machines there. So I think that's a completely rational approach, and that's why we said, okay, fine. We're not going to try and like push too hard. We're just going to do it for first. And then over time, when people feel comfortable and understand the nuance of what's going on, maybe they'll be able to get comfortable and come in. So I think that's number one on the political and risk side. The second thing, and by the way, one key portion of that is that part of our deal is that we're working with the power company and which is obviously the critical piece of infrastructure. So the physical security of our sites and so on, we're very confident that that's not going to be an issue, no matter what happens. So that's the second risk. That's the political risk. Second risk, I think, is just the thing that ironically has affected us the most is that it is a hyper bureaucratic society. Where it's like probably one of the most statist countries in the world, like maybe with the exception of like North Korea and a few other places. But Ethiopia hasn't been officially communist since the 90s, early 90s, but there's still it's still a very, very communist-like society in terms of like instead of the assumption is always the government has to do everything. The government decides everything, and everything is forbidden. Like even and whereas in most societies things are allowed, unless there's an explicit law against it, right? Whereas here it's the reverse. It's like everything is forbidden unless you're told you're allowed to do it. So let's say, for example, if you have a machine that has a chip that does SHA-256 hashing in most countries in the world, and ASIC for Bitcoin mining is just a machine. And well, okay, nobody said SHA-256 is illegal, therefore nobody's going to stop you if you want to design and build and run a computer that happens to do this particular calculation. It's just a computer, right? And if anybody wants to make to stop you, they have to come up with a reason why this computer is bad for society, and they would have to stop you, right? Like they would have to make a law, and you could fight the law, and you could
Yeah.
argue that this, you're right. Here, it's the opposite. It's like,
You
what?
could have asked for permission.
This computer?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you're not allowed to have this computer because we never said this computer is allowed. And like, but it's just a computer, and there's plenty of other computers. Nope, this kind of computer is not allowed, right? So this is the mentality here. So this creates business risk all the time, unless you're in something that's well worn and that's like a million people have done exactly that same business before. If you want to open a restaurant, okay, there's a million restaurants, and everybody knows that the restaurant concept is not going to dramatically change. But if you're trying to do something that involves bringing equipment, doing something
Yeah.
new, slightly different business model, then especially if it's associated with Bitcoin or financial stuff,
Or
even though
encryption.
mining is infrastructure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that risk is very real, and ironically, in my opinion, a bigger risk is that anytime you do business in Ethiopia, somebody can wake up next year and be like, well, this sector should be regulated in this way, and then they'll just come up with crazy
I
rules
mean,
like what we were talking about with the
we have to
cars.
mention it here, right? I mean, we've seen a
Hmm.
30% tax in Sweden for data centers.
Yeah,
We've
yeah.
seen voices also in America, of all places, say like, hey, in New York
Hmm.
there's a moratorium, or this should be illegal, or only under these conditions, or what. So
Hmm.
to be fair here, yes, I agree with you, but there's also other regions in the world, and at the end of the day, there is no 100% safe place to do this in, right?
Yeah,
So let's talk about the
yeah.
opportunities, Nemo. Why have we
Hmm.
tried to get people connected with you to start doing this, and what has been the approach so far?
Yeah, so I think the opportunity for the country is obvious, as we've discussed before. I think the country can benefit a lot by monetizing this great resource that it has, which is energy, and and it's stranded because of the rate of growth. So let's talk a little bit about that about in the country. So the stranded energy piece is to really be really clear is really a function of growth, right? Because it's a little bit the same in telecom when you build fiber, right? You have to take incremental steps. Like when you're building a dam or putting down the cable, you're putting a certain amount of capacity, and you have to build it, and it's an upfront. So it's like a step function, but then the demand is kind of something. The usage of it is going to grow slowly to catch up. So it's kind of, if you imagine, you have supply is taking these step functions, and demand is more like a
Yeah,
smooth
so you
thing.
always
So
have a
in
gap.
between the, so you always have these gaps. Now, if you're in a highly advanced economy, rich countries, then the development happened a long time ago, and it's not like you don't have like 100% growth in energy consumption, or so it's stabilized. So you're not really aware of it. So in the U.S., yes, grid stabilization and Bitcoin mining is really important and so on because of solar and wind power variable and demand
Yeah.
variability. But those are like small variabilities. Like largely at a big picture level, supply and demand has kind of been stabilized together for quite a while. But here, imagine we're a society where it's like so small, the amount of energy, and the growth rate is so fast that these gaps are
Yeah.
huge. So I think that's the fundamental reason why it's an opportunity for the country is to say,
Yeah, of course.
until there's always going to be these gaps, and we can monetize them. So that's, I think, the real opportunity for the country. For the Bitcoin miners, I think the opportunity is, or the community in general, globally, is two things. One is, if you care about the future of Bitcoin, you care about geographic diversification, and Africa is there was a period until like I think 2021 where everybody was concerned that like maybe close to 50 or percent of the hash rate of the
Hmm.
world was in one country, in China, and then now a lot of it is in the US. It's a little more diversified now. But anyway, so I think as Bitcoiners, we should want hash rate to be
Diversify.
widely distributed around the world. And so if it's growth in Africa is really good for geographic diversity. I think that's number one. And number two, it's it's a little bit unfair, but Bitcoin is always attacked for energy usage and carbon footprint and climate change. So, I mean, I think if you know what you're talking about, it's an unfair attack because every industry could be
Yeah.
attacked, right? But of course, we know why. It's because Bitcoin, there are people in power centers that will use any excuse to attack Bitcoin. So it is important as a defense mechanism, I think, to say, hey, by the way, Bitcoin is the most renewable energy intensive industry of all, so percentage-wise. And we can already, because of the supply and demand and the natural benefits of how it works, the supply and demand equation. But by coming to places where it's like Ethiopia, we can even move the needle even further and say even a higher percentage, because here the power is naturally, like we said earlier, all renewable. So we can help move the needle even more by having more of the Bitcoin hash rate be powered by green energy.
Yeah.
And
I can just see
yeah,
the
so that
headline
I think
already
is the
saying,
opportunity.
Bitcoin miners in Ethiopia are using power that otherwise consumers and industry could use, right? I think that's
Yeah,
something
again,
you'll
so
never
there's
get rid of.
always going to be another layer of
Yeah.
political attack. But
Uh,
actually, this is a good moment to plug Gamma.
yeah, let's do that quickly. Yeah. So QRB is a Gamma founder, Green African Mining Alliance. Talk to me
Yes,
briefly
and
about Gamma because
this
we
is
have
the
other.
Gamma logo here on my hat. Yeah, so Gamma.Africa is the website, the Green African Mining Alliance. So it was started. It's us and Gridless guy in Kenya and Trojan Mining
Nigeria.
in Nigeria. I think the first, yeah, it was us and Gridless were the first two, but we started this alliance to say, hey, we're all working towards the same goal. At the time, this was 2 years ago when we were just almost 3 years ago. We're working towards the same goal, and we want what we just mentioned in terms of Africa, geographic diversification, renewable energy, Bitcoin mining. So let's form this group where we can help each other out and pursue this vision.
Yeah.
So yeah, we now have 5 companies part of it, and we help each other with just advice
And
and share resources. Yeah.
And also a good point to plug the Gamma Seed program we just launched, which I'm heading up and
Yes.
organizing. If you're in Africa or are interested in moving here or whatever, if you have access to cheap power, make sure to visit the link in the show notes, because obviously Gamma is interested in growing. And the idea here is to enable young people or anybody really with access to cheap power to access refurbished cheap ASICs to buy and then to grow their own
Yeah.
operations, to give you the economic and financial tools that you need to become profitable and a well-educated mining company, basically. And then the idea is that you join Gamma and become part of it, right? So yeah, have a look at the show notes
Yeah.
and apply if it appeals to you. Nemo, the most important the most important benefit you haven't mentioned about mining in Ethiopia is that power is very cheap. And that is probably one of the most important factors, right? Do you want to talk about that a little
Well, yeah.
bit? Like, because at the end of the day, that's what miners would come to you, right? They're interested in making money. 70% of a
Yeah.
large operation of OPEX is power cost. So, yeah, that's obviously a very important factor next to diversification. And I believe, and you believe, that the risk profile of Ethiopia combined with the opportunity of low prices is well worth exploring. Right? Do you want to give people a hint around? Obviously, it all depends on volume. But where can we land in comparison to global other places if you compare to the Middle East or South America?
Yeah, I think it's pretty competitive, quite competitive. The power is cheap. The other hand, just to be completely transparent, everything else is more expensive. Because of geography and supply. So
Yeah.
that's just being realistic. Sorry, is that getting electrical infrastructure, getting stuff shipped in, and so on. If you just look at a map, Ethiopia is landlocked, far from the ocean. And like I said, the government can be really, really difficult on bureaucratically and customs and stuff and security and blah. So it's not so there we so and even like you could have a hard time even getting Ethernet cables, you know, when you're here. You have 100 machines and you don't have enough
Yeah.
cables to plug them in. So there, so yes. So just I don't want to be over rosy, but yes, the fundamental advantage is the abundance of energy and the fact that there's untapped energy means that prices are pretty
Yeah.
good for power, and then you have to sort of be confident that you can really do a good job on all the other variables, and keep it. So that's, I think our vision is to say, okay, we understand that we're going to be really, really good at all the other
Yeah.
variables, and be very efficient, and take advantage of also labor cost for even though Bitcoin mining is not like super labor intensive, but but we can it's still an advantage that we have. So yeah, I think we can get long term, if done correctly. Ethiopia has a very good cost advantage. The other big thing that we again though for the long term, we are really betting on implementing and working with the power company is more dynamic pricing, which for Bitcoin miners in the long term is really important. Right now, I think the most of the benefit is just geographic, right? Like you go to where there's
Yeah.
excess power. But over time, I think as the situation evolves, it will be important to have time-based pricing as well, so that if the demand is in the daytime, you get lower price at night, or and so on, or seasonal, or
Yeah, for
and
sure.
weekends. So I think we have talked about this. The power company does not do that currently, but we would really like to work with them
Yeah, it's
again,
also
it's
another
just part
push
of the
towards free market, the supply and demand for energy, not because at the moment in Ethiopia, if you consume less
yeah.
energy, you get a lower price, and the more energy you consume, the higher the price goes. So it's a completely reverse model
It's
to what a
complete,
free
yeah,
market would do,
exactly,
right?
and I think
Again, that's the communist.
yeah, price as a stabilization. Well, but we don't say pre-market because like capitalism is bad.
Oh, yes, sorry.
so, but the price mechanism can be a useful way to
Of
increase the
course.
stability
Yeah.
as well, right?
Yeah, you want to
Yes,
have a
supply
break
matching
even where it
supply.
makes more sense to shut the
Yeah.
miners off, because that's automatic grid balancing in a
Yeah,
sense, right?
yeah, exactly. So I think our big ambition is to not just be mining successfully, but also to help move the needle towards that a better
Yeah,
grid, and the work with the power company to have dynamic pricing, and make sure the regulators understand it, and make sure that the whole industry becomes really beneficial for the country. So that's that's our goal as a company, is to essentially, even if you look at our first line in our mission statement is accelerate electrification,
yeah, that's
because
it.
we
That's
think
what it's
that
all about.
Bitcoin is great. Yeah, we believe in Bitcoin. We're Bitcoiners, but there's many places in the world where Bitcoin is already successful and can do good things. But the unique opportunity here in Ethiopia in particular is help the electrification of the country.
Nemo, last question before we close out. Does Bitcoin consume enough energy or not?
It's I think the evidence, the empirical evidence, is that it consumes just the right amount. And actually, I wrote a paper. So, a quick plug: I wrote a
By the way,
paper
before
a
you plug
couple of
that,
years
Nemo,
ago.
people should,
Hmm.
about the economic situation, about the
Hmm.
currency, everything. Like you write a brilliant blog on Ethiopia, but
Yeah.
continue plugging. Sorry. Yeah, people should go look at it in the show
Okay.
notes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is more of a technical academic paper, but not. But I also have a blog that everybody should check out. Yeah. But this paper is on archive.org. It's called Dynamics of Bitcoin Mining. Um, And it explains this in it's. I tried to keep it. I figured it had a lot to say, but I worked very hard to get it to be as short as Satoshi's paper, 9 pages, because I was like, if Satoshi can write the Bitcoin white paper in 9 pages, nothing should be more than 9 pages. But anyway, but yeah, so it discusses a little bit about this question of like, what is it? Does it use too much or too little, and what is the security? What's the purpose of the energy use? Which which is obviously to say like the proof of work uh, concept in that Bitcoin has so brilliantly integrated into the system is the proof of work is valuable because essentially it does prevent dominance, right? It prevents ultimately the main concern is we want to stop 51% attack. And by if the energy is the consumption of energy has to be large enough that it would be hard for any one entity to get to 51%. That's the real goal. So and the beauty of it is that as the Bitcoin becomes more valuable and becomes a bigger target, therefore the threat grows when the value increases, because nobody wanted to attack Bitcoin in 2009, right? Because it
It
was
was
who
worth
cares?
nothing.
It's just a tiny little thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so the bigger it is, the more of a target it is. But automatically, and this is the beauty of the game theory of Bitcoin, is automatically the bigger it is, the more incentive there is to consume energy to do a proof of work. So the defense is automatically growing with the threat. And so I think, and whether, so I think that the dynamics is that the defense automatically grows, and it always grows becomes more and more difficult to attack. Now, is it difficult enough? That's there's no way to know that for sure.
Well,
But what we can say is that empirically it has proven to be enough, and right now it's basically like 1.5% of the market cap. The value of Bitcoin is the annual mining revenue. So and I mentioned a couple of things in that paper, but like just in passing, uh, what could you compare it to, and is it reasonable? Like, would you spend 2% of the value of something to protect that thing per year? And it turns out, let's say if you have a stash of gold, right? Like, say if you have a ton of gold, how much money do you spend to keep it safe? Like, you have to put a security system around it, alarms and big doors and armed men and so on. And if you look at the global average for storage, gold storage, yeah, it's actually not that far off. They do spend, like if you have $1 million worth of gold, you will spend 2%, like $20,000 a year paying for your security guards and your alarm system and so on. So I think 1%, 1 to 2% a year is not a ridiculous. It's not too high. It's not too low. It just happens to work. But and so I think the amount of energy consumed currently is organically determined. The market will determine where it stays. But so far it seems to be a good balance between being expensive enough to protect the system
yeah.
and cheap enough that it's not draining too much value out of the system.
I will allow myself. Usually I don't, but I will allow myself to say, in my opinion, Bitcoin does not consume enough energy in Ethiopia yet. Right? There's a bunch of stranded power
In
out there,
Ethiopia, yes.
and there needs to be
Yeah.
more consumption by this wonderful, highly flexible load that we know as Bitcoin mining. Nemo, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I think we've given people a good overview over what Ethiopia has going on. And with regards to mining,
Yeah.
if you're interested in this topic, please reach out to me. I can give you the basic overview. We can talk details. There's a bunch of options becoming available. We hope that this quarter we're gonna get the first hashes going. At least that's my hope. If you have learned anything from this episode, please let us know what it is. Ask us any questions that you have. Get in touch. Give us a comment in the YouTube section. And without yeah, anything being more said, because we've hit the magical 1 hour mark. I will see you next time. Bye bye.